So today, our session is Standard Operating Procedures. Marie Jackson, PhD, MBA is our speaker. And as a native of Pittsburgh, Dr. Jackson fell in love with medical research nearly 30 years ago while working at the University of Pittsburgh. Inspired by the possibility of being part of medical discoveries and that help people, Marie's journey has included stops at Emory University, Harbor UCLA, City of Hope, Amgen, Allergan, Parkland Health System, and more recently, University of California, San Diego. Marie is known for tackling difficult problems and establishing lean business processes to increase efficiencies in the research process. Dr. Jackson holds an MBA from California State University, Dumaguez Hills, and her doctorate is in the area of health sciences from Trident University International. She currently is Senior Director of the Children's Foundation Research Institute at Wabana Children's Hospital here in Memphis, Tennessee. So welcome, Marie, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, thank you so much, Margaret. I really appreciate the introduction. I just want to say thank you to Margaret Lynn and Dorita Brand and Dr. Karen Johnson for allowing Wabana to partner with UT to bring you this Research 101. So thank you so much. Let's see. So I don't have any conflicts of interest either, no financial, no conflicts. So I have the privilege to talk to you today about standard operating procedures. And so, okay, so can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. So the purpose of SOPs is, the aim is to achieve efficiency, quality output, and uniformity of performance while reducing miscommunications and failure to comply with industry regulations. So research seeks to discover new truths, and we accomplish that by quality data. So do you think Lucy and Ethel met the FDA regulations for candy processing? Probably not. So I don't know if you have seen the memes that you had one job. So I would like to propose in clinical research, we have many, many jobs that we do, and we usually juggle them all at the same time. And so it is mission critical to create a foundation for our processes to ensure we have high quality data. So there are many benefits to standard operating procedures. And one, again, provides the framework or the infrastructure or the foundation for a well-controlled, compliant clinical trial to ensure the integrity of the data collected. It ensures we meet the regulations. We have many regulations. We have regulations from FDA, good clinical practice, from the Institutional Review Board, federal or state laws. Excuse me. It also ensures that we can do training and onboarding of new team members because it's a great resource. All the standard operating procedures are written down and we can share that with new team members. It also offers an opportunity to examine and improve the processes. So as we write them down, we have a tendency to think more about them and we review them on a regular basis. And so we really can come up with really great procedures. And it also promotes the accountability for our team members. So I like to think of a SOP like a recipe for how to operate clinical trials at your site. So where do we begin? So the first step is to assemble a team. So not only do you want to include people that are within the process, you want to include people that may be outside of the process, upstream from the process, meaning they're before the process. You might want to also include people that are downstream or after the process. And then sometimes it's helpful to include a team member that's outside of the process completely because they have different perspectives on what they see. And so having a well-rounded team is very helpful. When you get your team together, you want to set clear goals and timelines. SOP writing is not not the most funnest thing to do. And so if you don't have clear goals and timelines, sometimes it's easy to get off track. Next, you want to sit down and gather all the literature. What do the regulations say? What does the FDA say? What are your current processes? You want to gather all the documents, review them, and record them. Then you want to create a list of processes that you want to include in the SOP that you're thinking of. Then you want to talk to your team about what are the steps and any foreseeable issues so you can address them within the SOP. And then the next important thing is you want to identify an owner. And this is usually the most senior leader in the unit. So this would be the director or senior director. So once you have your team together, then you want to create a standard template. And there, if you Google, there's a lot of different standard templates out there. And this is just kind of an example of the things that are helpful to have in your SOPs. So the first thing, you want to have a really good title. You want to have a title that if somebody is trying to search for it, they can find what they're looking for. You also want to include the background. It helps set the stage for what the SOP is and maybe how you got to where you are for this standard operating procedure. Clear headers and section headers that are bolded are important. That guides the reader through the SOP. Next, you want to have your processes or your procedures step by step. You want to include a purpose, and also within the purpose, the location that your SOP is for. So if you work in a hospital, maybe this is the hospital SOP, but maybe if you're in a clinic, it's going to be a different set of processes because the location is different. So you want to think about that. You also want to include references, and you want to put the guidelines, embed those guidelines as you're writing the SOP. You want to keep a history of the changes because, as you know in research, things often are changing and dynamic. Regulations change, protocols change, things change. And so keeping that history is important if you're trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together, say if an auditor is reviewing your studies. You also want to include definitions. You know, if you're thinking about a clinical research billing SOP, the definitions that we think about for charging and costs and those kinds of words are different to the revenue cycle people. So it's important to set that level ground and make sure everybody understands for this particular SOP, these are the definitions. Then you want to include a signature page or lines. You want to include the person's name, the title, that of course a place for the person to sign and the date. You want to include who prepared the document as well as who is approving the document. It's also important to version the documents. You want to make sure that the date's on there. You want to include an effective date as well as any revision dates. You also want to identify the audience and what the scope of the SOP is. So what is in scope and what is out of scope. And then include page numbers. And then it's also helpful for attachments and appendix that where you're having related documents. And so if there's another SOP that's going to help explain the process, for example, if it's a clinical research billing SOP, maybe you want to reference the coverage analysis SOP so people understand the full puzzle. So here's a great example from UT. It has the version, it has the effective date, a nice title that's bold, everybody can understand it. It's the IRB procedure for full board review. It has the purpose, the scope, who's responsible, the background. And so the UT has great examples for their formatting. But again, you can Google and look all over the internet. There's a lot of great examples out there. So now you have your team and you know what you're going to write about, and you have your literature and you have your regulations. So then you start to write. So how do you do that? So you figure out, you ask yourself the question, who knows the details in the process or who actually performs the tasks? And so that will be your first person. And then your approval people are the department directors again, or maybe even the quality department staff. And one way that I have seen writing SOPs to be more fun is to use the Lean Six Sigma writing flow cell. So let me explain a little bit about that. So writing flow cell, or any flow cell, just moves the documents or data around in a process that's efficient. And so for this, the first person, his name is Buddy. So Buddy would take a paper and a pen and start writing page 1. So Buddy would start writing the purpose and the title. He would go to the scope. And then once Buddy got page 1 done, he would pass page 1 to Sue, and Sue would begin to type page 1 into the computer. At the same time, Buddy would start writing page 2 of that SOP. And then Sue's typing everything into the computer, and then when Sue gets page 1 complete, she passes that page 1 to Michelle. Michelle goes into the computer and she adds graphs and checklists and resources. She formats, adds page numbers. And then once Michelle gets page 1 done, she passes to Robin. And Robin's really looking at the quality review, making sure the words are correct, that it's making sense, everything looks good. And then Robin passes page 1 to Chuck. And Chuck gives a final approval, reviews, and signs off. And so I've written SOPs not using a writing flow cell, and sometimes it takes up to 6 months to get an SOP done, because somebody writes it and then somebody reviews it and passes it off to the next person, and that person's on vacation for 2 weeks and then passes it to the next person, and it takes a very long time. So utilizing the Lean Six Sigma methodology, I was able to, at a different place, I was able to write 5 SOPs within a week and have them all approved at the end of that week. And so if anybody has any questions, I would love to talk about this. We can talk offline and I can share more about the Lean Six Sigma workflow. So inside your SOPs, it's often helpful to include diagrams, checklists, anything that will help people understand what they need to do and in the process of the order that they need to follow. So this is just an example from a billing workflow. Pretty complex, but it's helpful, again, if you have a complex process, to put pictures in there, it's helpful. Okay, so some tips for writing or creating your SOPs. First, and it sounds kind of strange, but you want to create an SOP on your SOPs. And that includes the glossary of terms. Again, it's important to define what you're talking about. So in your SOPs, which describes how you will handle your SOPs, you can include your definitions, how you're going to number and what your standard format is, what the sections are to be included in each SOP, how you're going to roll out training, how are you going to do revisions, the timing of your revisions. So it really describes how are you going to handle all of your SOPs. When you're writing, you want to make sure that the sentences are short, concise, and active. You also want to include enough details that clearly outlines what the staff or the team is to do, but you don't want to have super detailed, because what happens is that the FDA will come in and do an audit. The first thing they're going to ask you is, where's your SOPs? And you can have a 483 finding if you're not following your SOPs, and they will look and line up your SOPs and they'll look at your process. And so you want to have it detailed enough that people understand and follow the process, but not uber detailed where you get yourself in trouble. Again, you want to have your specific aim, and you want to have that general format so a broad audience can follow. You want to demonstrate compliance with the regulations and the guidance. Again, you want to embed, if you're quoting Code of Federal Regulations, put that in there where you're finding those regulations, and so everybody can understand where you're getting the information from. And then you want to list your tasks in the correct order that they're to be conducted. And this sounds like a no-brainer, but sometimes if you don't, I've seen SOPs where they're not in order, and then things go kind of like what Lucy did. So you get your SOP all written, and then what do? Well, you want to test the SOP to see, does it actually work as it's written? So you ask yourself the question, can a team member successfully perform the process unsupervised? And so hand it to somebody, have them perform the SOP, and then if the answer is yes, great, your SOP is ready to move on. And if not, just simply go back and rework the gaps or rework what wasn't clear to the person that was actually testing that for you. The next step is the approval process. So you want to establish the process by determining who will review and who's going to make the decision to approve. So inside you want to include the author of the SOP. They're going to sign off. The department head will sign off, and the responsible party will also be assigned a task for reviewing, doing revisions, and maintaining the master list of the SOPs. Then you want to do the distribution and training. So you want to notify the study team that there's a new SOP. You want to place the signed original copy in an SOP binder, or you can also create an electronic file folder system and put all the SOPs in there. Keep a paper or electronic original in a secure location. Then you want to think about your audience. What's the best way to do the training? Some people are hands-on learners. Some people are visual learners. Some people have to hear to do their best learning. And so think about your audience. Think about what the SOP is. Is it very complex where you need people to have hands-on? You might want to do a training person live or social distance, but live and in person. Or sometimes a lot of visuals and the diagrams is helpful. So think about that. And then you want to roll it out. You want to train your new staff on the SOPs, and you want to make sure that you're documenting that. So as you do your training, have people sign the date that they did the training and that they were deemed competent to perform that SOP. You want to monitor, once people are trained, you do want to monitor them to make sure that they're following the SOP. And then you want to ensure you provide refresher trainings at regular intervals. And how I've seen this done successfully is that usually corporate compliance will do an annual training session that will be required for all of the institution. And sometimes they'll let you include clinical research things that kind of cut across the institution. So that's always a good opportunity to get in that annual review cycle. And then I've also seen institutions where they include it as part of the evaluation process. So they make sure that their access to the systems and the software that they need is correct. And then they also ensure that all of their training is up to date when they do their annual evaluations. And it's really important to train and retrain. So implementation. So you want to ensure that you implement after the study team has been adequately trained. And I worked at a pharmaceutical company, and the FDA came in and did an audit, and there was a finding because the SOP was implemented and then the training documents followed. And so you always, always, always want to ensure that your training is done before you implement that SOP. Notify the team members that the SOP is effective and when it should be implemented. And then again, document that on the SOP. And then again, you want to reassess, make sure in just a few days after you launch that new SOP, make sure everybody's on the same page, check in with people, make sure that there's no errors or gaps or misunderstandings. So review of your SOPs. So how do you sustain these over time? So when should you do do a performance review on your SOPs? A lot of places indicate that that should be annually, but it should be at regular enough intervals where if the regulations are changing or there's a lot of new people on board at your institution, you want to make sure that you're reviewing and updating those SOPs to make sure that you're current with the trends. Sometimes if you have non-compliance occurring or protocol deviations, that may be a clue that there's something in your SOPs that is misunderstood or people are not following. So you might want to take a look. That might be a trigger as well. Another one is if you have monitoring or auditing findings, your monitor comes in and begins to see patterns in your delegation of authority log or other things. You want to make sure that you review look at your SOPs to make sure that they are complete and correct. And after reporting an issue by the study teams or other involved parties. So if there's a safety event at your institution or something happening, again, you might want to look at your SOPs. Okay. So what do you consider when reviewing your SOPs? So if it's been a while, again, at least annually take a look at them, maybe more frequent. And then are the purposes and the instructions of SOP clear and concise? If you're seeing non-compliance with the SOPs, what language needs to be updated? Has there been any policy changes, any regulation changes? And do the procedures work together? So if you remember at the beginning of COVID, they said, nobody wear masks, just leave them for the healthcare workers. And then at some point they changed and they said, everybody wear masks, and that's a good thing. And so you want to make sure that your SOPs don't have conflicting information like wear masks, don't wear masks. And sometimes when you're writing them in silos, you can have those differences and gaps, and then people get confused. So make sure your documents, not only within themselves, but they align across. So revising and archiving. So you want to ensure that when deviations occur, that you revise, look at the regulations, and then you also want to track those changes. So just like when you're doing your informed consent, you're leaving an audit trail. You have the old version, you have your track change version, and then you have your clean version. Same with your SOPs. You want to make sure that you have that track change version. Another finding that I've seen the FDA issue is old versions laying around. And so people don't realize that there's a new version, or they forgot. They stash the SOPs in their desk and they use them paper copies. Sometimes they put copies on their desktop and they don't refresh them when the new revisions happen. And so there's different versions all over the place. And so it's really important to get all those versions back. And one way, Le Bonheur is really good at this, is at the bottom of the SOP, they say this SOP is good only on the date that it's printed. And so that takes away the liability that if you come across a printed copy, it says it's only good for the date printed. So if it's any other date, it may not be the latest version. So here's a master tracking list of SOP example. So this is very helpful to have everything labeled in one place. So you have the SOP number, what version that it is, the name, and then any associated documents that go along with that. So for example, your drug accountability at the bottom, you may want to also have associated documents for your emergency unblinding, your investigational product order form, your temperature monitoring log, your drug accountability log. So those may all be associated with that drug accountability SOP. But you want to make sure in your SOP on SOPs that you delegate and assign somebody to keep this master list updated. So what SOPs are actually needed for research? And so here's the list, not an exhaustive list, but here's kind of the basics. And so again, the first one, your SOPs on your SOPs. The second one, roles and responsibilities of the research team. It's important to outline who's doing what at your institution. Number 3, screening, recruitment, enrollment, and retention of your participants. How does that happen at your site? And again, is it different in the hospital versus a clinic? The next one is the informed consent process. And that's probably the one the FDA will ask the most for. So you want to make sure that the informed consent process is really your stellar one, and make sure that everybody is following that process. Number 5 is the essential documents and record keeping. So how do you process your essential documents, your regulatory binders? Where do you keep them? Where do you store your documents? Do you have an off-site document storage? You want to make sure all that is outlined. Number 6 is your IRB submissions. Is it initial? How do you handle initial? How do you do revisions, your continuing review, and your study closures? 7 is event reporting. How do you report adverse events at your sites, protocol deviations, unanticipated problems? 8, clinical research billing and coverage analysis. You want to ensure that if your institution is doing billing that is mixed, meaning you're billing some tests and procedures out to third party, and you're also billing to research sponsors, you want to have that process outlined. 9 is investigational product, accountability, storage, transportation, shipping, destruction. Sometimes you'll work between sites. You have a hospital investigational drug pharmacy, but then you need to get drug to a clinic. How do you transport that drug? How do you ensure the chain of custody? Those sorts of things in that SOP. Number 10, monitoring auditing. So you can have a team of people that are doing auditing and monitoring for your site, as well as how do you interact and interface with your external monitors and auditors. 11 is study closure. So how do you handle your invoicing? How do you ensure that the study, no more activity is happening on the study? How do you make sure that the participants are notified? And then last is an emergency or disaster SOP. So this just happened, right? COVID. So we had to come up with a new SOP on how to handle COVID. Now we're making a new SOP for that and revising that, because now we're starting to reopen, and what does that look like? And so again, it's always changing in research, which is what's exciting. So I'm just going to open it up for just a few minutes if anybody else has other SOPs that they really like. Anybody?
Dr. Jackson, I think a lot of times some of these are the basic ones, like you said, and a lot of times you have to prepare certain SOPs according to your study. If you're doing an industry-sponsored study, they might want certain ones for a particular procedure for that particular study drug or device. So, but I think this is a very, very good starting point. And I always utilize it as much of the IRB's SOPs or the IEC, whoever you're getting your ethical review from. You can also use their SOPs.
That's a great point, Arita. You know, if they're already out there and part of your institution or an affiliated institution, it's great to partner with them and make sure that you're aligned. So that's great. Anybody else have favorite SOPs or ones that you've seen really work well? Okay. Oh, somebody gonna go
No,
ahead.
I was gonna say, Marie, this is Margaret. Their mics are muted, so they can send in a chat if they want to. If you want to continue on, I'll read the chats and bring those up later if you want.
Okay. Thank you, Margaret. So the next we're going to go through common errors, and I tried to make this fun, so I included the "you had one job" on each error slide. And so just to make it more fun, you had one job doesn't necessarily match with the error, but I want to keep you all awake. So number one error is not updating your SOPs. So you want to make sure that you're updating them, that you're revising them as things change and things are fluid in research. Make sure that you're updating your SOPs. Not documenting training. So you can make a beautiful SOP and a process and everybody's following it, but in research and in medical practice, we all know that if it's not documented, it wasn't done. So you want to make sure that you're documenting that awesome SOP training. So not properly distributing. So again, leaving those old versions laying around where people can get confused and team members don't follow the process because they don't have the latest hot off the press version. Next is not versioning or including an effective date. So you want to ensure to train the team again after you want to have the training and then make the SOP effective. So if you don't have a version or effective date on there, it's unclear as to what version that you're actually working on. Next one is making the SOPs too complicated or too detailed. So you want to ensure enough detail to follow without supervision, but not too much detail that you can lead you into audit findings. So writing the procedures in a manner that can't be followed. So you want to ensure the steps are in the correct order. You want to ensure that they're clear and concise, and doing the SOP test before you actually launch the SOP will hopefully avoid this error. And failure to train the team, especially when the SOP is revised. So you could say put the Skittles in the M&Ms in the dispenser, but maybe you forgot the step that you're supposed to open up the bag before you put them in the dispenser. So it can be the little things that can trip us up. And then again, I can't stress this enough because we got caught on the sponsor side implementing that SOP before the training. So this also, by doing the training and then making an effective date, it helps people go through change. People sometimes don't like change, and change is hard. And so by having the training ahead of time, allowing people to digest the new information and the new process, ask questions and understand, and then have the effective date, it just makes things go more smooth all the way around. And then the FDA will issue a 483 if you're not following your SOPs. So if you write it, make sure you follow it. And then I'll leave you with this quote: making the simple complicated is commonplace. Making the complicated simple, awesomely simple, that's creative. And so I hope that you have a new appreciation of the importance of SOPs and a few tools to help you get going to create your own SOPs and to sustain them. So I'll open it up for questions or comments.